The World Bank has projected that poverty will increase in Nigeria by 3 percentage points in 5 years to 2027. The World Bank made this projection in its Africa Pulse report, released on the sidelines of the ongoing spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank in Washington, D.C. The report, among other information, painted a dark picture of poverty in Nigeria, noting that while economic activity has shown some positive signs, the underlying challenges associated with resource dependence and fragility are projected to escalate poverty levels, demanding focused and effective governance reforms and inclusive economic policies. The report noted that while Nigeria saw higher than expected economic growth in the final quarter of 2024, particularly in its non-oil sector, the country's status as a resource-rich and fragile nation means it faces a concerning outlook for poverty reduction. I'm now being joined here on This Day Live by Dr. Muda Yusuf, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise and a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Good to see you.
Thank you,
Dr. Muda Yusuf on the program. Well, quickly, let's start with the World Bank spring meetings, IMF World Bank spring meetings. It ended yesterday. Many highlights from that World Bank spring meetings. We had the World Economic Outlook that was released on Tuesday. We had the Global Agenda for Poverty, which was presented by the IMF boss, Kristalina Georgieva. We had the report by the Fiscal Department of the World Bank. And in addition to all of that, we had the completion of the Article 4 consultations in Nigeria, which also involved the IMF. In all of this, the major issue is about the fact that, well, reform may be working in Nigeria, but there are issues with macroeconomic issues. There are issues, the director of the Fiscal Department told us, with social spend and with spending by government. 3 general recommendations in the World Economic Outlook about global economic outlook, which has been downgraded to 2.8. It varies. For Japan, it's down to about less than 4%. For which country is that now? For China, it's about 4%, 4.5. For the United States, it's 1.8. For Nigeria, 3%. But generally, there are issues. But the more concerning part of it is this report that more Nigerians are going to fall into poverty. Even if Nigeria is not adversely affected by tariffs and some of these things, but because Nigeria is natural resource dependent, it's going to be affected. And there were recommendations about what we should do. So what do you think of all these issues arising from the IMF World Bank spring meetings? I had to summarize. So
yes, it's quite a lot, really.
Yeah.
But at the global level, I think what is most worrisome for all participants and all countries at this time is the tariff issue coming from the United States and the implications for the global economy, the uncertainty that it has created globally, both for investors, for countries, for planning, and all of that. So that has been a major issue affecting practically all countries. And that is why we are seeing the kind of downgrade that we are seeing in the growth forecast, for the global economy. And that is one area where, as a country, we are also very vulnerable. The uncertainty that has been created by this tariff war, is affecting the global economy, it's affecting the outlook for commodity prices. And just as you cited in your intro, we are heavily dependent on commodity prices. We are talking now specifically about crude oil. And we have 2 major vulnerabilities here. We have vulnerability from the perspective of the price of crude. You know, in our budget, we had a benchmark of $75 per barrel. As of today, we had, I think, $66 per barrel. About 2 weeks ago, it came down to around $60 per barrel. So there's a whole lot of concerns around, you know, how that assumption can be sustained. If that assumption cannot stand, then clearly it will affect our fiscals. You know, and I'm happy that the fiscal authorities are responding to that. Because I remember that the finance minister said, well, himself and his team are going back to the drawing board to look at the implications of this, you know, commodity prices decline on the budget. So that means that there will be a review, both of the revenue projections and the expenditure projection, depending on how this pans out. The second vulnerability has to do with the oil output itself. From the outset, the oil output of about 2 million barrels per day was actually very optimistic. You know, given the challenges we have been facing, you know, with respect to our oil production. Now,
and oil theft too.
Oil theft. And all of that. You know, I know the government have been struggling to create the right kind of environment to attract more investment, but that is not likely to happen that quickly. So we also have that vulnerability. So the summary of this is that we are faced with a lot of shocks, and that is what the World Bank was alluding to in terms of, you know, what can create challenges of poverty and all of that for the country. But for me, I think it depends on, first, how the trend goes. Because even now, we notice that even Trump is gradually shifting from all his tariff war, because he's also facing some very serious backlash within, you know, the American citizens themselves, the business community and all of that. And the tone with which he started with the Liberation Day, the tone is beginning to change. It's beginning to look softer now. So going forward, I think the situation may not be as bad as it has been painted. You know. Secondly, I think I need to also say that when we talk about poverty in Nigeria, it's not only because this report was anchored largely on the fact that we're a resource-dependent economy. But there are other variables. If you can deal with other factors, for instance, if you look at the poverty map of Nigeria, the Northwest has the highest concentration of poverty. This is according to NBS. Followed by the Northeast, followed by North Central, followed by Southwest, then South, and Southeast. That is the distribution. So the bulk of the poverty situation or poverty incidence is in the northern part of the country. And the factors responsible for that are not exactly related to whether we are dependent on crude or dependent on oil or not. They are dependent largely on two major factors. There is the factor of insecurity, which has ravaged the entire area and affecting, you know, employment and productivity and all of that. Secondly, there is the factor of climate change, which is also related to the insecurity. So these two factors are very, very critical. So if it's something that we can make some progress about, you know, in terms of bringing some security to that area, the level of poverty in that area can be mitigated because it's tied largely to the issue of security in that zone. Then there's also the issue of, you know, because I think the IMF also referenced that, the quality of spending, how we manage our finances. Yes. Corruption, yes.
Judge Yeva mentioned corruption.
Corruption. That is very key.
Social spend.
Yes.
And all of that.
That is key. Because if you have reforms, on the face of it, the reforms are good, purely from a macroeconomic point of view. But when you look at it from the social prism, in other words, how well is the reform impacting on the citizen, the benefits of reform? And I think the IMF also referenced that. The benefits are not trickling down enough. So we need to examine the social outcomes of those reforms and see how we can do a lot more to ensure that not too many people are left behind in the process of the reform. So there's a whole lot that can be done within the social space, social investment, and even with collaboration in the private sector. Because the private sector is also playing a major role in some critical social areas, like education, for instance, like health, even energy, public transportation. These are critical social areas where the government has a responsibility. But the government doesn't have enough resources to adequately deal with those issues. So the private sector players are there. So we need to be thinking of what kind of strategy can we bring to the table to incentivize private sector investment to boost education, which is related to human capital, to boost health provision, which is also related to human capital. So these are some of the things that we can do. So it's not as if it's as gloomy as it has been presented. These things are conditional. If, for instance, Trump, after seeing all the heat from this tariff, begins to roll back these things, you begin to see some recovery of commodity prices.
Okay. You say it's not as gloomy as it has been presented. The World Bank report, that is part of what we're discussing, says that there are 695 million poor people in the world, and that 80% of those poor people are from Africa.
Yeah.
Over 506 million of the, below poverty line population of the world is from Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Ghana, Ivory Coast. And you say that's not gloomy?
No. The point I'm saying is that the gloominess I'm talking about is the projection that the situation will worsen in 2026 or 2027, that the situation will continue to worsen. What I'm saying is that it's not as if these things cannot be mitigated. Because the proposition of the World Bank is based on the fact that these are resource-dependent economies. And to the extent that commodity prices are dropping, these countries are vulnerable. That is what the World Bank has anchored its own conclusion on. So the point I'm making is that if the trend changes and commodity prices recover, if the trend changes and, for instance, we're able to make up with our oil outputs, if the trend changes and we're able to deal with all this security problem, especially in the northern part of the country, the Nigeria-specific situation will be somehow mitigated. So that is the point I'm making, because we need to contextualize what the World Bank is saying. Okay. It's all about commodity prices, whether we are resource dependent or not.
Okay.
So those are the issues.
Well, I get your point, Dr. Yusuf, except that, look, we have we have a popular saying in Nigeria
yes.
that when anything goes up in Nigeria, it hardly comes down. Unemployment has been up for decades. It has not come down. Inflation is perpetually up. It's only when you economists do voodoo economics.
No.
Now you come and tell us that it has dropped.
That one is rebasing and all of that.
It's voodoo. It's voodoo. So you are saying all things being equal, ceteris paribus. On the one hand, on the other hand, that's economistic talk.
No, sincerely, it's not as if we cannot address our social problems. A whole lot of it, also related even to that report, is about governance and the use of resources. We talk about, for instance, food security. Because when even the World Bank are saying that when the percentage of people living below whether $2 per day and so on, the issue of poverty is much wider than that in scope. Even in our own NBS report, they were talking about multidimensional poverty. They are talking about food security. They are talking about housing. They are talking about health. They are talking about public transportation, about sanitation. There are so many issues around which you can be discussing poverty. So if you can get, and I think it's not a completely hopeless situation, to get our governments, whether federal or states or subnationals, to commit a lot more resources to address these social issues, we'll be getting somewhere. Because it's not as if there is no solution to these things. There are things that can be done to mitigate it. For instance, we have a lot of private sector investors in education. Why can't we exempt them from all forms of taxes so that they can contribute their quota to human capital development? Why not? We have a lot of private investors in healthcare. Pharmaceuticals, hospitals. These are gaps that the public sector cannot fill. What incentives are we putting on the table? To say, okay, if you are investing in hospitals, we are freeing you from any form of tax, any form of import, and the revenue loss cannot be that significant when you compare it to the social returns, to the economic returns to the economy. So these are the things that we can do. The government has a role to play directly. The government also has a role to play in conjunction with the private sector, incentivizing private sector investment in some of these critical areas. Take renewable, for instance. In your intro, I hear you are talking about solar power in the villa. But again, if you have investors in that space and you give them enough incentives, many of us can walk away from discos and just install solar panel and we move on. That will even give competition to all the discos. It will check them if they know that we have alternatives.
Okay.
Those are some of the things that we can do.
It's good you brought up the issue of solar power for Aso Rock. Yeah. I think, how much are they spending now? Is it?
I learned 10 billion
about
naira.
10 billion naira.
Yeah.
So, but some people have kicked to say, look, there's energy crisis in Nigeria. The discos and the gencos are saying they are being owed over 4 trillion naira in debts, and that they may go on strike. Now the presidency is saying, well, we can't be paying 47 billion naira per annum, they claim, for electricity for Aso Villa alone. No? So that's why they want to do solar panels. Why shouldn't they do solar panels for all of us, the whole country?
You see, the point here is that because sometimes we bring a lot of emotions and sentiments into some of this conversation.
Okay.
We are the ones that have been saying that the government should cut cost of governance. Now, the government has taken a major step to reduce costs. Because in the villa, don't they have generators in the villa? They have generators. They buy diesel. When you compare the costs of this solar to the cost of diesel, the cost of generator, it is far, far more cost effective. That is the angle from which I'm looking at it. It makes a whole lot of sense. And that is why I think that we should encourage other Nigerians, other private sector organizations to be able to move on to solar.
So it's okay for them to have solar in the villa, and the rest of us are in darkness, including the private enterprises.
No. It's not that we should be in that. That is why I started by saying that any investment in solar should be incentivized. Tax incentives, import duty incentives, whatever it is, in order to make it cheaper for those of us who are citizens, corporate organizations, to be able to walk away from the discos or rely less on them. I use a bit of the solar and I know the amount of relief it has brought to me. My generator repairer have been calling me that, what is happening? We haven't heard from you for some time. They didn't know that I was getting the relief from the few solar panels that I've just put on. So it's a great relief. But what I will appeal to the government to do, government should scrap import duty on inverters. They should scrap import duty on batteries. Just as they have removed import duty on solar panels. And remove all these bureaucratic barriers in getting approval for those import duties. So that the prices of these things can crash. Even countries that are not so blessed with sunlight as much as we are, they are embracing solar a great deal. Talk less of a country that we have sunlight, that people are even almost running. This is a major resource that we should tap into. So I'm fully in support of what they have done, but the thing should go round. And it can only go round if you have the right kind of incentives to crash the cost so that the ordinary people too can go on to solar.
Well, the part of it I'm hearing that just take away from me is that the thing should go round.
Yes, it should go round.
There should be an energy mix.
Yeah.
Electricity should not only be for the privileged.
Certainly.
It should be for all of us.
That exactly.
But look, if you look at the front page of this day newspaper today, the CBN governor and also the Minister of Finance, they are saying that Tinubu's reforms have restored investors' confidence and stabilized the FX market. They are saying, look, the economy is doing very well. And it will do even better, even while we are here talking about poverty and the privilege, enjoying better opportunities than ordinary Nigerians. Do you agree with them, or do you disagree?
Now, there are three major objectives of economic governance. There is the economic objectives. There is the social objectives. There is also the profit motivation objective for the private sector. So if you are managing an economy, you must create an enabling environment to attract investment. And the way you can attract investment is for people to bring in their capital here and be able to make money from it. Whether they are domestic, capital providers, or foreign. That is one objective. That's about creating enabling macroeconomic environments. The second objective is the economic objective. Economic objective is what are we doing to ensure that we have much higher productivity within the economy. So whether you are an SME, whether you are a nano enterprise, whether you are whatever sector you are, the government has a responsibility to ensure that an enabling environment, particularly issues of security and issues of infrastructure. Those things are key. That is critical for productivity. That's the economic objective. The social objective is how to make all of these things inclusive so that we are not leaving too many people behind. It comes to the point of poverty that we are talking about. Well, it is one thing for you to be doing well, for some private sector people to be making money, as we are seeing in this environment. It's another thing to be seen to be, creating an environment where people feel that, yes, the quality of life is improving. Then there is also the issue of ensuring that there's productivity in the economy. So when you hear this kind of assessment, it depends on which of the metrics you are looking at. If you look at the macroeconomic metrics in terms of, okay, what is our current reserves? What is the stability of the exchange rate? What is the GDP growth? Ordinary investors or foreign will be looking more at that. And how well can I repatriate my resources? That is what they'll be looking at. Portfolio investment. Yes, those portfolio investors, foreign direct investors, they are more concerned that if I come into this country, can I take my money out? Yes, there's enough liquidity for that. They are happy with that. But for the ordinary Nigerians, what they are looking at is what is the price of gari? What is the price of noodles?
That's what we are looking at.
What is the price of rice? What is the cost of transportation?
That is our own.
And how much am I paying for my school fees? How much am I paying for
schools will ask for school fees next week.
Yes.
Next week. This is the big problem now.
Exactly. These are the areas in which the government can provide relief. If you have quality public education, why will you be going to private schools? Why? Whether primary, secondary, or university. It used to be the other way around many years ago. Public institutions were far better than private institutions. But the reverse is the case. So when you have a situation where education has become almost completely commercialized, you are leaving a lot of people behind. The children of the poor cannot put their children in those schools. That is an issue. So if you have a proper structure of spending that can save the pressure on family budgets, from expending so much of their budgets on education for their children, on health facilities, on public transportation, that will bring a lot of relief. So these are the kind of conversations that we should be having in a way that we can ensure that economic governance is delivering social objectives. Because at the end of the day, economic management is about human beings. It's about giving the whole process a human face. Even in those who are in the private sector space, they also have a responsibility to ensure that the capitalism is given a human face, particularly those who have some monopoly powers. These are some of the responsibilities that we need to bring to bear on both the government, the federal government, the state governments, and we don't want to see a situation where, because the state governments are richer now, rather than provide education, provide things for rural areas, and many of them are building all sorts of things in their state capitals. buying SUVs for traditional rulers and all sorts of things, building bridges and so on, where many of their rural people are suffering. So these things must be inclusive, whether we are talking at the federal level or at the state level. So those key priorities are things that we need to ensure that whatever progress we are making is an inclusive process. It's not just limited to macroeconomic data. There is the social data, there is economic data.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf. I think at the end of the day, we both arrived at the same point.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.